On this channel, I specialise in making really complex looking images easy to create. So just follow along with my step-by-step tutorial of this painting and you will amaze yourself. So as always with my tutorials, I'm using the app Procreate on the iPad Pro. But I don't see any reason why you can't use the process and the techniques on a different app or whatever tablet you happen to be using. Having said that, I've opened an A4 canvas, which is 297mm by 210 at 300 dpi. In terms of the brushes I'm going to be using, I only use the brushes that come free with the app. So I use within airbrushing, the soft brush at the top of the list and the medium brush, all at the default settings. And within the artistic brush, I'm going to use the leatherwood brush, which I'm going to show you how I've amended it a little later on in the tutorial. And they are the only three brushes I'm going to be using. In terms of the colours, I've pre-selected some colours here. Each of the colours has what we call a hexadecimal code associated with it. These codes are listed down in the video description. Take a note of them, type them into this area, press enter. The colour appears up here and you can piece it together yourself. Or next to the codes, you'll find a link to my Patreon page and you can download the whole colour file for free there to save you some time. Please note there are links to my Facebook group and my Instagram page too. And if you like this kind of tutorial, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe, and don't forget the bell notification to make sure you get notified of all my future videos just like this. And with all that said and done, I'm going to go to my first colour on the top row, which if I go to the colour disc, you can see is a very pale blue. And just to get rid of the white, I'm going to drag and flood fill the entire canvas. I might as well stay on the same layer. I'm going to go to my second colour and I'm going to go to my airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put it up to 15% size and 100% opacity, and just somewhere a little bit below the top here, I'm going to just do a band of that. And I'm going to blur it in anyway, so I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it to about 30%. Create a new layer on top of that. I'm going to go to my artistic brush, or artistic brush's leatherwood brush, and I've turned within the grain area, the scale of that grain, which would normally be somewhere up here, and you can see like a canvas texture. I'm going to set it to none, and the stroke path, I'm change the spacing from being really close together. I'm going to change it to be more like about 30%, or thereabouts. Well, anywhere in that region will do. And I'm going to put the size up to 4% and the opacity at about 50%. And I'm just going to create some kind of noise of things going off in the background. Now, generally, I think just keep it in an up and down kind of movement, but vary the amount of pressure that you're using with this brush. It doesn't really matter over the edge of this screen anyway, because we're going to have other things that come into this region, but we just want to create the sense that there's foliage and trees that are just in this distant area. So I'm alternating, almost kind of pressing on, then releasing pressure, pressing on a bit more, and then releasing pressure. And then I can have it shut down most of the light in the two edges. And I'm also going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur that in to about 5%. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go to my soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to choose the third colour along, and I'm going to put it to about 20% size and 100% opacity. I'm just going to fill in from the bottom all the way up until it gets into this upper region to about there. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it to about the 50%, like that. And I'm going to create a layer on top with my soft brush within airbrushing, move along to the fourth colour on the top row, have it set to about 20% size and 100% opacity. I'm just going to do a stroke of it here, just towards this edge, both sides. Then the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, I'm going to blur it in all the way to 100%, like that. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 5, go back to my colours, and I'm going to go for this black colour on the second row, the first colour. It's got a hint of warmth to it, and I'm going to stay on the soft brush, and I'm going to put it at about 25% size and 100% opacity, and just bring in a band of it at the bottom. Let's just make sure that you fit the full width of that brush in there, like so. Go to my next colour on the middle row, and I'm going to turn it down to about 15% size this time and just do a band in the top area like this. Turn it down again to about 10%, go for my third color and just do again another band at the top like this. Then I'm going to go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it in to about the 80%, like so. Then I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 6. Go to my artistic leatherwood brush again, keep it on the same settings as before, but I'm going to start using some of these further colors to build in some texture into this area. So I'm going to go for the fourth color. I'll put my texture or the brush size up to 5% and the opacity down to about 10%. And I'm just going to start building in some of this texture. So if I press lightly, we're going to get a light texture or a thin amount of this texture. And if I press harder, then the shapes or the size of this texture kind of increases. So I'm going to build this in and maybe press a little more lightly as we get further away. You can always go back to the size and just reduce it. So maybe more like 3% as it disappears up, and vary it up anyway. You can go over it in regions. Just really start to shut down some of the darker colors at the bottom. Go to my colors, go for this third color from the right, and again, work into it, add some of this texture, vary up the extent to which you're pressing in. So I'm pressing a little bit more, it will create slightly larger grains, which works nicely. And I'm going to extend that a little bit further up too. You can see I'm doing really nice big sweeping motions to about halfway so far. Then I'm going to go to this next color, which is second in from the right. And again, I'm going to continue that a little bit further up. And you might want to just check your brush size at this point. It's currently at 3%, but I'm going to put it down to 2. And I'm just going to continue that kind of texture a little bit further up. It's going to be less noticeable, partly because of the color is getting closer to the blue that's near the top, and it kind of just starts to disappear into that region. But I'm also bringing it back down and kind of blending it in, really going over it and over it, really trying to draw those different regions together a little bit more with this texture. It's kind of just binding them together a little bit better. And then with this color at the very end, I'm just going to start building in a little bit of that as well. Maybe bring it down a little bit more, build some of this in. It really is starting to blend the two regions together really quite nicely, which is exactly what we want. Okay, once we got to this stage, we've really already kind of created a sense of real atmosphere and distance, which is working nicely, I think. But obviously we haven't got a lot going on in this space. So I'm going to create a new layer on top, and I'm going to go back to my colors, fifth color from the left. We're going to stay on the same brush that we have been using, the leatherwood brush. I'm going to keep it at 2% size, and I'm going to put it at around 10% size. And in this kind of distant region, probably about halfway, maybe a touch higher up than half, but only just. I'm going to start building it in from this side. And much of this is going to be obscured by trees. We don't need to worry massively. And this is really quite subtle to begin with. And in a sense, we're going over a lot of what we have created, but it is an essential part of the process. And at this point, I'm going to start claiming out, revealing where the path is going to be. So I'm going to imagine like a winding path that cuts through. So I'm going to start with the top section. I could just keep going over it for this side. We're going to have vibrant colors on the ground, but as they sit in the more of the distant area, the atmosphere, the blues are going to really subdue it and take away the vibrancy and the reds and the yellows, the oranges that you're going to see when they get further down, further away from that horizon and closer to us. But initially, I've got a section over here. I'm going to build in another section here. And obviously then between this section and that section, we've got a bit that's still left, and that is our path that cuts through. I'm going to build it up a little bit more on this side, keep going over it. I really like the leatherwood brush. I use it for so many different kinds of textures. I just find it incredibly versatile. And yeah, if you've followed any of my tutorials recently, you'll probably know it. I kind of keep returning to it. It just does so many wonderful things that I can't leave it alone really as a brush. I do amend it, I kind of alter it a little bit, but fundamentally it's already kind of there. So I've started the suggestion of a path higher up. I might as well stay on the same layer, but I'm going to go from that colour to this colour, which is fifth now from the right. It's a slightly warmer colour, so I'm going to concentrate some more of that. I've not changed the settings at all, but I'm just bringing slight more concentration of this a little bit further down towards us. I'm not going to do any at the top region. and really starting to bring it down towards us now. Now I have done a very similar autumn landscape to this already, but it was several years ago, and I feel that the brushes and the techniques that I've now figured out how to teach kind of make this simpler in some ways, but also much more believable and realistic too. So I'm going to leave that layer as it is, and I'm going to create a layer on top, go back to my colours. I'm going to use this first proper warm colour, which is fourth in from the right. Now, let's look at the size of this brush. I'm going to turn it up just into the 3%, but only nudged into that. And now, probably about a third of the way up, we're really going to start seeing the significance of this warmth cutting in. And perhaps we can just guide this a little bit, just sketch in where we want the edge of the path, something like this. And we can also map it in for this side as well, something like this. And then we can just more liberally start to go over this, start piling it up. And it's okay to leave some gaps on the ground. We want some of this original dark colour to be appearing through. So I'm not going to completely fill it, that isn't the plan. So just take this a little bit further up in places too. Just keep it patchy though, don't allow it to build up too much in these distant areas. We can have a hint of it, that warmth coming in, but not too much. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer on top. This is now layer 9. Back to my colours, I'm going to choose this really vibrant orange, which is third from the right. Keep it at, well, slightly up on the 3%, so the top end of the 3%. And let's check our opacity. So I'm going to put it up slightly as well. I need to be careful. I'm going to try 15% size and really start to tease in some of these colours now. We're certainly going to get more vibrancy as we get closer to us. It's going to be significantly brighter. Now, even when we've added these colours, it doesn't stop us removing them at a later stage. I'm going to try and just initially be a little bit cautious anyway, and start piling this in a little bit more, building it up. Let it spill out onto the path a little bit more. Stay on the same layer, but go back to my colours. I've got this really nice red, which is second from the right. And perhaps I'll just turn it up a hint more, so more like 4% size. Again, I'm tapping it in a little bit more now. I want this as a kind of base, rich, reddy colour, and then I can go over it with some more intense, bright colours too. We're really getting the intense sort of spectrum, so from real cool blues down to vibrant warm colours here too. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 10, and I'm going to move to the middle row of colours, this black colour. A little bit of warmth, but not very much. It's pretty much black. And I'm going to use the medium brush with an airbrushing. And it is initially going to seem pretty extreme. We're going to put it down to the 2% size and 100% opacity. And I'm going to do a kind of distant set of trees, not quite as removed as the texture in the background. So you are going to notice the tree trunks, but they are going to be thin and they are going to be distant. So I'm going to place them in initially, somewhat carefully, but really not agonizing over it. Just place in roughly where you think trees might be. Vary them up at the base just a little bit. There might be sort of clusters that overlap. And you can go back into one or two of them and just make them a little bit thicker too. Something like this. And I want to respect the path as well, so I don't want to do anything growing on the path. So we're going to try and keep it in and around that area, but not on it. So I'm going to do some perhaps over here too. Doesn't matter too much. It's more going to be an issue for the foreground ones. So I can quite liberally just place them in this area and not worry too much. So I'm going to get quite a lot initially of these. I'm obviously just going to refine some of these, make the base of the tree just a little bit thicker. Perhaps just to even thicken the whole tree up for one or two of them. There can be bigger ones as well as thinner ones. Just take a little amount of time just to refine these up a touch. It just takes a little bit of patience initially, but I wouldn't say obsess over these ones. They're going to be lost in the mix quite substantially, so just get the essence of them in there. And although we've done them with a medium brush, I'm probably just going to soften them in slightly anyway. So I'm going to go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur them in to about 4%. Just takes any minor little issues that perhaps you feel they have away. And I'm also going to go to the layer, tap on the N and reduce them to about 60% opacity. That's straight away going to knock them back somewhat, but I'm also on the layer, going to tap on the layer, turn alpha lock on, and using the soft brush with an airbrushing, set to about 15% size and considerably further down on the opacity. It's about 5%. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use this fourth color along initially and just along the top. Now, because we've got alpha lock, the only thing that it's going to amend is the detail on that layer. And I'm just going to start bringing this more subdued color down. Now, it's not going to be very noticeable initially, but if I then switch to the third in from the left and do something similar again and start to build it up more gradually, we're going to start noticing certainly the top parts of the tree start to disappear into the atmosphere, into this general kind of glow of the top area. And they're going to start just sitting a little bit further back, which is exactly what we want them to do. I'm just going to bring that a little bit further down as well. Now, you do need to do this particularly gradually and carefully. It's really easy to overdo it. If I show you this, turn the opacity up, and you can see it has a completely opposite kind of effect that you're going for. So we need to just do that incrementally. So that's why I put it down at 5%, and you can just start to judge, is it going too far? Easy to do, so just be mindful of that. It needs less of this near the bottom, where it's naturally going to just be allowed to be a little bit darker. And then especially when we have this area at the top where it's a little bit more of where the light is emanating from, it's going to start disappearing into the atmosphere just and haze a little bit more, something like this. Again, we can go back to the layer and we could even just try turning the opacity down even more. It's the very background layer, so of all the layers that you can play around with the opacity to get the right balance, this is the layer to do it with. So I think somewhere around the 50% actually works really quite nicely. So that already gives us a sense of distant trees, and now anything we add that get richer and darker now is really going to help even more push them back. So we're going to create a new layer on top, and we're going to repeat the process somewhat again. So we're going to go back to this dark color with the medium brush with an airbrushing, probably stay around the top end of 2% size at 100% opacity using the same black. And obviously we're going to start introducing some more significant and nearer trees. So just take a little bit more time with these ones, try and neaten them up a little bit more. Again, give the base of the tree just a bit more width, and you can have some that kind of cut kind of between the trees that are in the background as well. I wouldn't come any further than about this point, so we're just adding like a further layer in and around this area and that area. But they are going to be noticeably chunkier because they are definitely nearer. So you can thicken them up. Think about the base of the tree, just fanning out ever so slightly where required. I'm not going to do the trees splitting off too much. They're pretty much straight lines, straight up and down, or not straight, but singular lines. And if they do have any branches coming off them, they're really going to be significantly less. So I'll just turn it down to the lowest part, 2%, and maybe just get the odd thing kicking out from one or two of them that's noticeable, but it's really not going to be much. So maybe I'll just do a couple here and there, back up to the largest part, 2%, and then start adding some more. Anything on this layer, if it just cuts in front of something you've already created, it really isn't a problem. It's part of the process. Sometimes you have to be a little bit destructive, just like nature would itself, so don't worry too much. Okay, we can go in and refine this to your heart's content. As long as you've got somewhere with it, maybe just add, like I said, a few subtle little branches coming off them here and there. So perhaps I'll just go in and do that. I don't want to do massively large amounts of this, but I will do a few. Okay, and we're going to do pretty much the same again. I'm going to maybe just reduce the opacity of that layer to about 80%. Just takes it a little bit further back. Then I'm going to also turn on the alpha lock for that layer. Go back to my soft brush. It's on 15% size, and again at 5% opacity. I'm going to do the same process again. Perhaps I'll just start with this lighter color initially, third in from the left. And I'm just going to start bringing in this element here, so it just knocks them back a little bit more. Very easy in the top area. This is the area where it's just easy to just knock it back and it instantly improves it. And it's only really when we get down to this lower section, we just need to be a little bit more careful. Tap it in more carefully, and you could even turn the percentage down of the opacity even more if you're worried that you might, just get a bit too enthusiastic and overdo it. Zoom in a little bit more. Perhaps I will do that. I'll turn it down to 3% opacity and just go in and carefully subdue this lower section. And if you have subdued it slightly too much in an area, it's not a problem really. On a later layer, we can always go back in with a slightly darker color and just bring out a hint more darkness in one or two of these trees. So they feel a little bit more foreground than the previous ones, which is great. I'm not too worried about the base of the trees. I'm going to go in and add some more leaf textures, which will further help that. I'm going to go back to my layers and create a new layer, layer 12. Repeat the process. I'm going to go to my black color, airbrushing, medium brush. I'm going to perhaps put it up to 3% size and 100% opacity. And I'm going to start now piecing in some more significant trees again. So these are going to be definitely more foreground. Not the most foreground, but they are significantly more prominent. Something like this. And there's no reason why we can't also have smaller ones. Even though they're closer to us, we're going to have younger trees, obviously. So we can vary that up in places. But then set with that lowest part of 2%, I really do need to, or you'll need to, start placing in a bit more of the accuracy of the tree base area. Just really start thinking about how it's going to start feeling around us. So just let it kick out, so the kind of tree roots and let the tree trunk just flare out a little bit at the base. Clearly it's got to stay grounded, so it has to spread its roots, and it starts happening just before it goes underground. You will start to notice that kind of look. And again, we can have branches coming from there a little bit. Again, I'd be reluctant to do too much, but certainly one or two seems right. Perhaps even turn it down significantly to the 1%. Could do a series of little branches coming out from some of them. Why not? Again, I can go in and further refine this a little bit later, but we're just getting the process in initially. With all of my tutorials, I get you the basics in, show you how to build up a technique and a process, and then if you want to really spend the time to fine tune, you can do that to your heart's content. But I just like really to explain some of the process and technique so that it can help you along the way. Now with that layer, probably not going to turn the opacity down, but I am going to turn the alpha lock on. Go back to my soft brush with an airbrushing, back to my colors. I'll try this color first because we are going to have predominantly dark colors. So I'm going to use the fourth color. I will probably need to turn it up from the 2% we had it on initially or recently. Put it back up to the 5%. Keep it the 15% size. And I'm just going to start chipping away a little bit, top part of these trees. And it really is low, that 5% now. So, you know, it takes a little bit of going over just to start to bring in that impact. And although these are significantly darker than the other ones we've already placed in, I'm probably going to place in some even darker ones, really chunky ones in the absolute foreground. So reserve the blackest of blacks for the nearest ones. So perhaps just take away a hint from the base of the trees. Again, really, really subtly. Where you really want to take it away is from the top region, like so. And we could even go back in with the third color from the left. And again, we're gonna have to be careful with this because it is quite potent. Maybe just reserve that for the middle section where we want to create like almost like a column of light coming down. So that's going to be impactful. Something like this. Then, yet again, a new layer, layer 13. And back we go to the medium brush with an airbrushing. Put it at a 3% size, 100% opacity, back to the black. And now we're going to go for it. A couple of really near to trees. Again, it's destructive. I don't care. It's going to cut in front of things we've already got. And that's absolutely fine by me. So it's going to be significantly thicker. It's nearer to us. It's going to be chunky. And just go for it. So a couple there. Maybe another one that just cuts in front here. And then we could really go for it with a massive tree that just cuts all the way from the top to the bottom of the frame and just really gives us a sense that we've got something super foreground, like so. Maybe we could even have another one next to it too, just cutting out of the frame, like so. Now at the minute, I feel like we're just getting the kind of skeleton of the piece, and that's fine because we're going to start refining. So I'm going to turn the brush size down to the 2% again. Again, just have these fanning out a little bit. If it leans a certain way, then it almost needs like another section here just to anchor it. leaning that way, so it needs almost like a little bit more here just to give it the strength to stay in the ground. But we can have these features on both sides. Again, we're going to obscure that slightly with leaves, like so. Okay, perhaps I'll just have, now I've got it down to the lowest part of 2%, perhaps just another branch kicking in, something like this. Reduce it down to the 1%, and have little bits coming off that branch too. And we can always go back in, once we start adding some leaves and other effects, we can connect the dots basically with fine branches and stuff. Okay, so that's the basic framework, like the skeleton of the piece, but obviously we need to start fleshing it out with a bit more vibrancy of colours. I feel like also I could go back to my initial layer of trees there, layer 10. I feel like I could also duplicate that layer, perhaps go to the transform, flip horizontally, and I feel I could double up some of the impacts of these trees in places because it's looking a little bit thin really. So I'm just gonna move that somewhere like here, maybe even go to that layer and just reduce the opacity somewhat in a little bit, and it just doubles up the kind of impact of that. Okay, so I'm gonna, on this top layer, just add a little bit more of a sense of lighting and texture onto this tree. So I'm gonna turn alpha lock on. I'm gonna use my soft brush, go to the third color, and I'm gonna turn the brush size to about 2% size and have it at around 10% strength opacity. And I can just start piecing in some texture here, or rather a slight hint of a highlight on this side of this tree, and then maybe some over here too. I'm really not being careful, I'm just tapping some suggestion of something here. I don't have to worry about the edge, like I say, so there's no sense of me having to be controlled and neat about it at all. Go back to my colours. I'm going to go second in from the right and continue that idea. So again, build in some texture on this bark. I can do this one for a little tree next to it as well. Just bits. Just takes away the flatness of the foreground trees a little bit. We can also go to perhaps the artistic leatherwood brush, put the strength of it to about 20% and the size at say 2%, and perhaps just build in a little bit more texture as well using this brush. Okay, I feel like I need to start going in with some serious, significant kind of leaves on the ground. So let's start that effect. So I'm going to go back through my layers. So we've got the distant trees here. Go to layer 10, create a layer above that, and using the leatherwood brush still, I'm going to go with some of these colors because these are the leaves on the ground colors. So I'm going to skip the first one. I'm going to go for this one, which is 5th in from the right, and also the color that's 4th in from the right. I'll start with the 4th, see how we go with that. If it looks too vibrant, then I'll switch a little bit to the 5th, and we're going to have it at 2% size and about 20% opacity initially. And I'm just going to start in and around the base of these tree areas, piecing in a little bit more of this texture. Now it's only going to be an issue around the base of those trees because any other trees is going to be behind as a layer, so I don't need to worry about that at all. So the only layer I have to really think about is the one in that distant area. So even if I feel like it's gone over some of these trees a little bit too much, I can always go in with the eraser and just fine tune and remove some of the leaves. So I'm really going to kind of add it a little bit more liberally and not worry about that. Another alternative is I could simply just put it under that layer initially, and then again, I suppose that kind of removes that issue totally. And I'm just building up the vibrancy of the leaves in this scene. I can bring it further down, that's not a problem, into the foreground. Really start to ramp up the effect. Again, I'm going to go for 5th in from that right side, and perhaps I will just use some of this as well, just to soften it in slightly. There should be a hint of it getting more subdued in the very distance, like this. And I'm going to go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I will blur that texture in a bit because it's just a little bit too sharp. So I'll put it maybe at about the 5%, and I can continue to build in. Even though I've blurred it in, doesn't mean I've finished with that layer necessarily. I can keep going, keep building up. And yes, it's a bit laborious and I've got it on a super low percentage, but I'd rather do that and build it up very gradually than just go hell to leather and just make it look a bit rushed. So then I'm going to go to layer 11, or sorry, I go on layer 10 and create a layer above it, and now it is actually under a layer 11, which is probably better approach. So we'll go for the fourth and the fifth this time. So I'll start with the fourth again from the right. And again, I'm just going to go in and just start building in some of this warmth. And if we go to layer 11, you can see the layer of trees where this is going to be significant too. So we can start just building it in and around, making sure that they kind of like have a context and a nice richness that's coming more into the foreground, closer to us. Go to layer 11, create a layer on top of that. So now it's sandwiched between layers 11 and 12. So it's underneath these trees. I'm probably going to use the vibrant orange, which is third from the right this time, and really start ramping this up more significantly. So just remind myself which of these trees that it's got playing in and around. So in the short term, it's going behind these particular ones, and I can start bringing this down more significantly now as well. And we also have our red and our yellow colors. So I'm just going to go to layer 12, create a layer on top. So again, it's just underneath these layers, but on top of all the other layers. So on that layer, I'm probably going to start going in with the orange and the yellow and really ramp this up. So the orange first, and I've got this set to 2% size. Perhaps I'll just put it up a little bit to the 3% size. I've also got it on 20% opacity. Maybe I should put it up a little bit more to the 25%. And I'm still being a little bit cautious, just starting to piece this in, allowing some of the background color to remain, because yeah, I just want the textures to be varied and a little bit patchy in places. Keep building this in. We're going to increase the luminosity pretty significantly in a moment. I'll show you how I'm going to do that. So again, this is just like the groundwork for future or further details that I'm about to add. Again, some of the times I'm now going over some of those details. So if I want to subdue some of those, I can go in with an eraser, perhaps put it to airbrushing, doesn't really matter which, and I can just go in with a high strength and just remove some of those textures if I feel it's interfering with any of the other trees at this point. It's not really a problem. We can fix that and fine tune that later on. I do feel like I want to go to the top layer and create a layer on top of that and change the layer properties from the normal blend mode down to the add blend mode. And still using the leatherwood brush, I'm going to use these vibrant colors. So for example, the yellow. In fact, now I'll start with the orange. I'll have it at the 3% size. I do need to turn the strength of this down because it is a pretty potent effect. So I'm going to put this probably about 10% and see how we go. And I'm going to start building in this really vibrant effect. And the great thing about the blend mode here is that it just builds in light really significantly. And it never seems to fail to build in a glowing, really beautiful effect. We could perhaps just be a little bit braver, put that up to maybe 15%. I know it seems really tentative, but it is quite potent. So I'd rather do it gradually. And I'm now thinking light's coming down to the center area. We have a kind of channel of light funneling down from above. And then it's just really bringing the life into these leaves. So I can just start to go over it and bring that effect in more and more. And again, we can change to the red. We'll get a slightly different look. With the red, it's still going to glow, but perhaps it's just not quite as orange. It's just got a hint of more depth. And perhaps just need to be a little bit more careful around these trees now because it is a layer on top. If we wanted to, we could stick it under layer 13. The only trees that it's really going to go underneath, I suppose, are these two, and then 3 little ones here, or 2 big ones and 2 little ones, whatever, or 1 big one, 2 little ones, whatever. And we can continue just ramping this up, building in this glow piece by piece. I don't rush at these effects. It really is important when I do things is just to build in the effect more gradually. So you have to have a little bit of patience, but I do feel it's worth it in the end. Put it up to 4% size. Perhaps I'll put it up to 20% strength, and we can really start to be a bit more bold in this foreground area, building that glow and that vibrancy. Have a little bit of fun with it. It is a very satisfying tool and technique using this blend mode, and I can't help but to kind of use it in almost every picture that I'm using or creating at this time. And again, we can alternate perhaps to the yellow. We're going to get just a slight ramping up of this yellow again, or the light rather, and really push it a little bit further. Perhaps just along this edge we need a bit to be careful, so I'll just turn it down to the 3%. We've got some really nice yellow leaves accumulating on this path edge, which look really good. And I'm just looking at my percentage. I'm starting to get a feeling that I just need to ramp it up even more, put it up to 30%. Now we're really high up there. Tap in more of this texture. I feel that's really starting to help. But there's something perhaps I could do in the center area, because although I feel happy that it's created this glow here, it hasn't significantly impacted the path yet. So when I go back to this layer, perhaps I need to go to a different kind of color for that area. And if I did go for one of the warm colors here, was suitable earlier on, perhaps I could use this color for this middle section here, but I probably need to turn that strength down to about 10%. I can continue this effect in this region. So I want it to have the same kind of effect as the leaves, where it's really bringing out the light. To balance it out, I suppose it needs to be spread out across the whole region, this area. So if the leaves are super illuminated and the light's channeling down, then everything on the path too is going to be affected. I can't ignore it. And I'm just tapping it in, creating a little bit more variety, allowing some gaps to perhaps remain too. So if we just do it too evenly, then we lose that sense of texture a little bit too easily. I could ramp that up again to, let's go for about 40%. And I could just start allowing that to show more significantly as individual points of texture and light along this path. And that can work quite nicely. Perhaps we could change from that color to maybe one of these bottom colors. So maybe this middle orange. Some of that could be impacting into the pathway a little bit too. Subtly, we can just create a variety of different colors in this area, I suppose. It's super foreground. I'm just going to swap and change from that color to a couple of the colors here as well. So I've got this, sorry, if I go to this third from the right, that color, and we can just start bringing in a touch of this into the mix. Maybe what we're on 3% size, let's put it up to 4. Still up to 40% strength, which is really quite strong for the add blend mode, but it seems to be working for us. So I'm quite happy to continue it as long as it's creating the right kind of look. We could even bring some of it in over here just to vary it up. Again, create that bridge in this area all the way across. It's going to then sort of dissipate because we've really got an illuminated area here and not so much in the distance. So perhaps we just don't need anything on the path in the far distance too. It's just going to be kind of isolated in this region. So I'm going to create a layer on top. And again, with my leatherwood brush, I'm going to go in with my orange here and the red, and with a brush size at 4% and the opacity at 50%. I'm going to start creating some leaves that cut in here. Perhaps I'll start with the red. It's a nice richer base note, and then I can build lightness on top of it, I suppose. So we've got some that are just kicking in here. I'm going to change direction of this brush stroke a little bit. So rather than all just going left to right, that creates a left to right look. You can also go up and down, and it just changes the direction of the actual little tinier elements of the brush. So we want to just create a slight hint of kind of randomness, I suppose. Just a few details in cutting in from that side. I can alternate then to the orange and then just cut over the top, build up. Now on close inspection, these leaves aren't going to look great, but I'm really just helping you create the more of an impressionistic. It's kind of realist or realistic in a sense, but it's slightly impressionistic in as much as if you zoom in too much or zoom in much at all, it's going to break down. But the effect is what we're going for. So I'm just building up some of these leaves here, just on this edge to begin with. And again, it starts to build it in and bring it together. I can obscure some of these details at the bottom of the tree as well, just blend in these tree trunks. Let's just create some at the very top. And I feel like there's one here that we could just surround this tree. Perhaps I'll put it back up to the 4%. Then the orange, just start to build some leaves in and around this one. And maybe we'll go a little bit the red for some areas too. The red's really quite strong. So I'm just going a little bit more hesitantly with the red. And really just ramp it up with the orange a little bit more. Something like this. Again, we can go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in a hint. So I'm putting it at around 3%, just softens it in, takes the edges off the texture. Go for another layer. Perhaps I'm going to put it underneath our foreground trees. So our foreground trees are on layer 13, so I'll put it underneath there. And I'm going to look at my colors down here. So I've got this orange that's kind of slightly more pasteled, which I think will work, especially if it's an area where it's catching the light more significantly. I feel like our leaves are just going to be a little bit more washed out as they get further away and they are catching the light. So I'm going to give this orange as the base note color for this region, and then I can move along to this first one on the bottom row. And again, just work in and around what we've already got there, build in some slightly more vibrant, lighter areas, and then the end colour there too on the bottom row, and I can push it again even further. So just build that into both sides a little bit, like so. I feel like I want to go back to some of my very first layers and just start building in the richness of that blue a little bit more. So I'm going to go to layer 4 and create a layer above that. And now it's layer 21. Now I realise that I'm using a lot of layers here. Now, if you're limited for the amount of space you have on your particular iPad and the model you've got, or the RAM that you've got on your model, then you could condense some of the layers that I've already created. But as long as you know that it's above that background blue layer on layer 4 and underneath layer 5 where we started to add the ground colours initially. So on layer 21, I'm going to go in with the soft brush set to 10% size, 50% opacity strength, and I'm going to go in with the third colour from the left, and I feel like I just want to shut down some of the glow and some of the light in some of these areas. I'm just going to subdue the light in this area, for example, and I might even go to the fourth colour, which is significantly stronger, and perhaps in this area particularly, I just want to darken it up somewhat. I feel like it's going to make these leaves glow a little bit more if we've got a little bit less light showing through in many areas. And I can also do it over here too. Back to layer 18 where we had the layer blend mode changed to add with the leatherwood brush, and back onto my yellow, and I'll try the orange too in a moment. I think I just want to kind of bring the intensity up. So I've got it at 3% size and 25% opacity. And again, just gonna push it even further. Why not? I do like big contrasts in my personal work and also these tutorials. I really like to push it a little bit. So I'm just gonna turn that down to 2% size and up to 40% strength opacity, and just really bring this in to this region even more. I think contrasts are just something that makes artwork, especially in photography, really work. And that doesn't have to be just contrast of colours, it could be textures too. Contrast just generally, I think, are what catches our eye. And so if you can incorporate high contrasts of various different elements into your landscapes or your artwork, I think it is going to help. I'm going to go back to some of my layers that are cut between some of the trees. So I'm going to go back to layer 16 and using the leatherwood brush still, I'm going to have it at 3% size, 50% opacity, and I'm perhaps just going to use some of the more subdued colours, so maybe the fourth in from the right on the top row, and just add some of these into the mix behind some of these layers. Obviously we're not going to get all the leaves in only one area, it would look a bit strange. Perhaps I'll turn the strength down actually to about 30%, thereabouts, and just add a little bit more in the mix up in behind this area, and then perhaps just in and around this area too. Add it to wherever you feel, and I'm also going to go in with the middle orange on the bottom row, and yeah, as and where I feel it's required, just keep adding more, building up the drama, building up the effect, if you feel it's an appropriate thing to add to yours. So you don't have to copy mine slavishly at all. Obviously with organic things, you're going to get such a lot of variety. Make yours your own. Take some of the techniques that I'm showing you, and hopefully that's going to help you to kind of build up your own. I feel like the more you can build up the kind of layers on this, the better it's going to look. So don't skimp out on that. Okay, I'm just going to create a layer on top, change the blend mode from normal to add, and with a soft brush at about 20% size and 5% opacity, using this color that is on the end. It wasn't there at the beginning of the tutorial, but don't worry, it's on the list of codes and it's on the download link. I'm just going to touch it on the ground there, just a hint, and maybe just send it upwards there a little bit in the very center. And I feel like it's just going to channel some light a little bit down that center area. Now, if you want to go in, for example, with a medium brush on this top layer with something at the bottom end of 2% and maybe about 20% opacity, you could, for example, go in with some of these colors like this orange, and you could just be a bit more controlled and specific and pick out with this blend mode some highlighted leaves. And I think that again is going to be something that just lifts some little details in this scene and just brings them out, makes them work a little bit better, and I would recommend doing that as well. I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I probably will continue just to refine it a little bit. It's the kind of thing, because it's leaf texture, you could just endlessly play around with this. So do that to your heart's content. If you've enjoyed following along, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe, and all importantly, don't forget the bell notification to make sure you are notified of future videos and tutorials just like this one. Thanks for watching. I shall catch you back here soon. See you later.